My name is Ainsley, I'm 32 years old, and I was standing in the rain outside my childhood home when my parents slammed the door in my face. 3 months earlier, I'd discovered my husband's affair and lost everything in the divorce. That same night I found Tyler, a teenage boy digging through the restaurant dumpster, where I worked double shifts just to survive. What happened next changed both our lives forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who believes in second chances? Have you ever helped a stranger when you could barely help yourself? Please hit that like button if you believe real family isn't always blood. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope emerging from the darkest moments. Trust me, what Tyler told me 3 weeks after I took him in will absolutely blow your mind. Let's begin this journey together. For 8 years, I thought I had it all figured out. Derek was everything my parents Grace and Robert had dreamed of in a son-in-law. He was a pharmaceutical executive with a 6-figure salary, a charming smile, and the ability to make my mother giggle like a schoolgirl whenever he complimented her cooking. We lived in a beautiful colonial house in Westport, Connecticut, complete with the white picket fence and neighbors who thought we were the perfect couple. Every Sunday, we'd have dinner at my parents' house, where Derek would slip checks to my father for his failing hardware store, and promise to take care of their little girl forever. The facade crumbled on a Thursday evening in September, when I decided to surprise Derek at his office with his favorite Thai food. His secretary Brittany was bent over his desk, and it wasn't to review quarterly reports. The shock wasn't just the affair itself, but Brittany's swollen belly, 6 months along with what Derek casually announced was his son. As I stood there with pad thai dripping onto the imported carpet, Derek didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, he smiled that same charming smile and said the words that would haunt me for months. "Your parents already know, Ainsley. They've known for months. Who do you think helped me move my assets offshore?" The Christmas party confrontation that followed was brutal. Derek had invited me specifically to humiliate me in front of his colleagues, announcing our separation while Brittany stood beside him wearing the diamond bracelet I'd thought I'd lost. But the real cruelty came later, in the lawyer's office, where I discovered the prenup I'd signed in young, trusting love had more loopholes than Swiss cheese. Derek had systematically hidden assets, transferred property, and even fabricated evidence of my supposed prescription drug abuse. His lawyer, a shark in Armani, presented falsified medical records and testimonies from colleagues I'd thought were friends. Within 6 weeks, I lost everything. The house went to Derek, along with most of our savings. My car was repossessed because apparently it was a company vehicle. My credit cards were canceled, my bank accounts frozen pending investigation of alleged financial misconduct. Derek even managed to get a restraining order based on a violent incident that never happened, complete with photoshopped bruises on his neck. The small-town gossip mill went into overdrive. Suddenly, I was the crazy ex-wife who'd attacked her husband in jealous rage over his pregnant girlfriend. But nothing prepared me for my parents' betrayal. I showed up at their door with 2 suitcases and tears streaming down my face, expecting comfort and shelter. Instead, my mother Grace stood in the doorway like a guardian of propriety and delivered the words that shattered my heart. "A divorced woman brings shame to this family, Ainsley. Derek has been nothing but generous to us. He pays for your father's medications, helped us refinance the house. You should have been a better wife. Maybe if you'd given him children instead of focusing on your silly career, this wouldn't have happened." My father Robert stood behind her, silent as always, his eyes avoiding mine. The man who'd walked me down the aisle, who'd taught me to ride a bike and promised to always be my hero, couldn't even meet my gaze. When I begged him to say something, anything, he simply shrugged and muttered, "Your mother's right. Derek's a good man. You must have done something to drive him away." They closed the door while I was still talking, leaving me standing in the rain with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I found a rundown studio apartment above a dry cleaner in the worst part of town, where the smell of chemicals made me nauseous and the radiator clanged all night like a ghost in chains. Marina's diner became my second home, where I worked double shifts for Marina, a tough Greek woman who didn't ask questions about why a formerly wealthy suburban housewife was suddenly desperate for minimum wage work. I served coffee to truckers at 5 in the morning and cleaned tables until midnight. my hands raw from bleach and my feet screaming in cheap shoes. Every night, I'd count my tips and wonder how I'd fallen so far so fast. The woman who used to host charity galas was now grateful for leftover pie that would otherwise be thrown away. 3 months into my new life of poverty and isolation, I was working the late shift at Marina's diner on a particularly brutal February night. The Connecticut winter was unforgiving, with temperatures dropping below freezing, and a wind that cut through my thin coat like a blade. It was past 11 when I noticed him for the first time, a teenage boy hovering near our dumpster in the alley. At first, I thought he was just another kid looking for trouble, but something about his movements caught my attention. He was methodical, careful, checking around before lifting the lid like he was afraid of being caught. His appearance was a contradiction that puzzled me. Even from a distance, I could tell his shoes had once been expensive, probably designer, though now they were held together with duct tape. His jacket was clearly quality, the kind of North Face that cost hundreds of dollars, but it was torn at the shoulder and stained with things I didn't want to identify. He moved with the kind of posture that spoke of good breeding, shoulders straight even as he dug through our garbage. When a car backfired nearby, he didn't just flinch, he dropped into a defensive crouch that made my heart ache with recognition. I knew that kind of fear. I'd been living with it since my divorce. For the next 2 weeks, I watched him return like clockwork. Always after 11, always alone, always checking over his shoulder. Marina had a strict policy about not feeding vagrants, said it would only encourage more to come around, but I couldn't watch this kid root through garbage while we threw away perfectly good food. I started making mistakes on purpose, overcooking burgers or accidentally making an extra sandwich that would have to be tossed. I'd wrap them carefully and place them on top of the dumpster, just happening to step outside for a smoke break afterward so no one would disturb him. At first, Tyler wouldn't take the food. I'd watch from the kitchen window as he'd eye the wrapped packages suspiciously, pride warring with hunger on his young face. He was 16, though I wouldn't learn that until later, with dark hair that had grown too long and eyes that held too much wariness for someone so young. One night, I left a note with the food. "It's okay. We all need help sometimes." The next morning, the food was gone, and in its place was a napkin with 2 words written in surprisingly elegant handwriting. "Thank you." The dance continued for days. I'd leave food, he'd take it after I went inside, sometimes leaving notes. The burger was perfect. "Thank you for the extra fries." The pie reminded me of better times. His spelling and grammar were perfect, his handwriting the kind they taught at expensive prep schools. Everything about him screamed privilege, except for the hunger in his eyes, and the way he jumped at shadows. Marina started noticing my food waste was increasing, but she said nothing, just grunted and looked the other way. Maybe she had a softer heart than she let on. Everything changed on a particularly vicious night when the temperature dropped to single digits. I'd worked a 12-hour shift and my feet were so swollen I could barely walk, but I couldn't leave without checking on the boy. I found him collapsed by the dumpster, his lips blue and his body shaking violently. Pride be damned, I half-carried, half-dragged him inside, ignoring Marina's sharp intake of breath. "He's just a kid," I said, daring her to object. She threw me a towel and pointed to the break room, muttering something in Greek that sounded like either a curse or a prayer. Tyler was barely conscious, mumbling apologies as I wrapped him in every tablecloth I could find and forced hot soup between his chattering teeth. When he finally focused on me, tears pooled in those 2 old eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't know where else to go. I've been sleeping in the park, but they padlocked the bathroom where I was staying warm. That's when I made a decision that would change both our lives. "You're coming home with me," I said, using the same tone that had once commanded boardrooms. "No arguments." My studio apartment was barely big enough for 1 person, let alone 2, but we made it work. Tyler slept on a pile of blankets in the corner, insisting he didn't want to take my bed. That first night, he told me his name and admitted he'd run away from boarding school, though he wouldn't say why. I could see the quality of his education in the way he helped me organize my meager belongings, quoting Shakespeare while we sorted through donated clothes from the church basement. "When sorrows come, they come not single spies but in battalions," he said, folding a sweater with military precision. I set 3 rules: complete honesty, help with chores, and he had to stay in school. I enrolled him at the local public high school using an old address and some creative paperwork, praying no one would dig too deep. Tyler threw himself into both school and helping around the apartment with an intensity that broke my heart. He'd wake up at dawn to have coffee ready before my early shift, leave notes about his day, and always had dinner waiting when I dragged myself home. It was like having a teenage housewife, if housewives could discuss advanced calculus while making spaghetti from scratch. But the nightmares told a different story. He'd wake up screaming about locked doors and dark rooms, begging someone named Sandra to let him out. When I tried to comfort him, he'd pull away like my touch burned, apologizing over and over. "I'm not worth your kindness," he'd say. "If you knew who I really was, what I come from, you'd throw me out." I'd hold him anyway, this broken boy who'd somehow become my family when my real family had abandoned me. We were 2 damaged souls trying to keep each other afloat. And for a few weeks, it was enough. 3 weeks after Tyler moved in, everything changed with a single sentence. We were having dinner, a luxury of Chinese takeout to celebrate my first full paycheck since taking him in. When he set down his chopsticks and said quietly, "Ainsley, I need to tell you something. My father is Preston Blackwood." The name hit me like a physical blow. Preston Blackwood wasn't just wealthy, he was stratospherically rich, the kind of billionaire who owned tech companies and appeared on magazine covers. His face was plastered on billboards around the city advertising his latest innovation in artificial intelligence. I stared at Tyler, searching for signs of delusion or lies, but his eyes held only resignation and fear. "I know how it sounds," he continued, twisting his napkin into knots. "The homeless kid claiming to be a billionaire's son. But it's true and I can prove it." He disappeared into the corner where he kept his few belongings, and returned with a worn envelope. Inside were documents that made my hands shake. A birth certificate listing Preston Blackwood as the father, photographs of a younger Tyler at what were clearly lavish birthday parties, and most damning, a Swiss bank account statement in Tyler's name with more zeros than I'd ever seen. The story spilled out of him like water from a broken dam. His mother Claire had been Preston's secretary, young and beautiful and foolish enough to believe his promises. When she got pregnant, Preston was already engaged to Sandra Wellington, heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune, and the perfect society wife. Preston set Claire up in a discreet apartment, paid for everything, and visited twice a month to play father when it suited him. Tyler showed me pictures of those visits. Preston teaching him chess, taking him to museums, always careful to avoid cameras. "He said I was his special secret," Tyler said bitterly. "I thought it was a game." When Tyler was 10, Claire died in what the papers called a tragic accident. She'd fallen down the stairs of their apartment building, breaking her neck. Tyler's voice went flat as he described finding her body, how the neighbors whispered about the man in the expensive suit who'd been seen leaving just hours before. "The police said there was no evidence of foul play," he said. "But Mom was a dancer before she met my father. She was the most graceful person I knew. She didn't just fall." Preston arrived within hours, Tyler's things already packed. That was the day he met Sandra Blackwood for the first time. And the day his real nightmare began. Sandra was everything Claire hadn't been. Cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless in protecting her position as Preston's wife. She had 2 children of her own, legitimate heirs who attended the best schools and wanted for nothing. Tyler was installed in a room in the basement of their Westchester mansion. Officially introduced as Preston's ward, a charity case from a distant relative. The staff was instructed not to speak to him unnecessarily. He ate meals alone in the kitchen after the family had finished. When guests came, he was locked in his room to avoid uncomfortable questions. The psychological torture was relentless but subtle. Sandra would forget to include him in family vacations, claiming she thought he had school. His food would mysteriously spoil, forcing him to go hungry or beg the cook for scraps. His belongings would disappear, only to turn up destroyed in the garbage. When he tried to tell Preston, Sandra would cry and claim Tyler was a troubled child making up stories for attention. Preston, desperate to keep his perfect family image intact, chose to believe his wife. He'd look at me with such disappointment, Tyler said, tears streaming down his face. Like I was the problem, not her. The boarding school in Switzerland wasn't an education, it was an exile. The place specialized in troubled teens from wealthy families, the kind of institution that promised to reform difficult children through discipline and isolation. Tyler spent 2 years there, allowed one phone call a month to Preston, who rarely answered. When he finally escaped, he didn't run home. He knew Sandra would just send him somewhere worse. Instead, he used the cash he'd saved from selling personal items to other students and made his way back to New York, surviving on the streets for 3 months before I found him. I could access my trust fund when I turn 18, Tyler explained, showing me the bank documents. But any attempt before then alerts my father. Sandra would know exactly where I am. She promised if I ever embarrassed the family, she'd make sure I disappeared just like my mother. His hands shook as he folded the papers. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was afraid you'd either think I was crazy or you'd want to contact them for a reward. Most people would. I pulled him into a fierce hug, feeling his thin shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. We're going to figure this out, I promised, even as my mind raced with the implications. Harboring a billionaire's runaway son could destroy what little life I'd rebuilt. But looking at this broken boy who'd trusted me with his truth, I knew I'd protect him no matter the cost. What I didn't know was that our problems were about to multiply exponentially. The very next day, Derek escalated his harassment campaign. He'd discovered where I lived and started calling the diner during my shifts, telling Marina I was mentally unstable and shouldn't be trusted around customers. He showed up at my apartment building, loudly telling neighbors I was a violent ex-wife who'd attacked him. The super started giving me suspicious looks, and I heard whispers in the hallway. Then my parents appeared at the diner during the lunch rush, my mother's voice carrying across the crowded restaurant as she begged me to stop this nonsense and go back to Derek, where you belong. No one else will want used goods, Grace announced to the entire diner, including Tyler, who was doing homework in a corner booth. You're 32, Ainsley. Your looks are fading, you have no money, no prospects. Derek is willing to forgive your mistakes. Don't be a fool. My father stood behind her like always, silent endorsement of her cruelty. When I refused to engage, she turned her attention to Tyler. And now you're taking in strays? What kind of example is this? What will people think? I snapped. In front of customers, co-workers, and the boy I'd sworn to protect, I finally said the words I'd been holding back for months. What will people think? They'll think I finally grew a spine. They'll think I chose dignity over money. They'll think I value myself more than you ever did. You sold me to Derek like cattle, picked money over your own daughter. You're not my parents anymore. Parents protect their children. They don't auction them to the highest bidder. My mother's face went white, then red. My father actually looked at me for the first time in months, something like recognition dawning in his eyes. They left without another word, but not before my mother delivered her final blow. You're no daughter of mine, she said coldly. Don't come crawling back when this all falls apart. As I watched them leave, Tyler slipped his hand into mine. You just lost your family because of me, he whispered. I squeezed his hand and managed a watery smile. No, I just chose my real family. But even as I said it, I could feel the walls closing in. Derek, my parents, and soon the Blackwoods. We were two people with nothing facing an army of those who had everything. Derek's discovery of Tyler living with me came through the efficient small-town gossip network that had already branded me as the crazy ex-wife. Darla from the hair salon saw Tyler helping me carry groceries. She told Megan at the bank, who mentioned it to her sister, who just happened to work at Derek's company. Within 48 hours, Derek had transformed from harasser to concerned citizen, filing a report with Child Protective Services about my inappropriate relationship with a minor. The social worker who showed up at my door looked exhausted and skeptical, but she had to investigate. Ma'am, we've received a complaint that you're harboring a runaway minor, she said, clipboard in hand. Tyler was at school, thank God, giving me time to think. I invited her in, offered coffee, and calmly explained that Tyler was my cousin's son who needed temporary housing due to a family emergency. The lies came smoothly, desperately. She looked around my studio apartment, taking notes about the cleanliness, the food in the refrigerator, Tyler's neat corner with his school books. He seems well cared for, she admitted. But I'll need to speak with him and verify this family connection. That night, Tyler and I stayed up creating an elaborate backstory, complete with fake names and places. He memorized every detail with the kind of focus that broke my heart. This kid who should have been worrying about prom dates was instead learning to lie to protect us both. But our carefully constructed fiction crumbled when Sandra Blackwood entered the picture with the force of a Category 5 hurricane. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a black Mercedes, flanked by 2 lawyers and 3 men who were definitely not lawyers. I was just getting home from my morning shift when I saw her standing outside my building, looking at it like it was something she'd scrape off her shoe. Sandra Wellington Blackwood was everything I wasn't. Tall, blonde, elegant in that effortless way that came from generations of money. Her suit probably cost more than I made in 6 months. When she saw me, her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "You must be Ainsley," she said, voice cultured and cold. "The divorced waitress who thinks she's won the lottery." Before I could respond, one of her lawyers stepped forward with a folder. "Mrs. Henderson, you're currently harboring Tyler Blackwood, a minor who belongs in the custody of his legal guardians. We're prepared to file kidnapping charges unless he's returned immediately." My mouth went dry, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't know any Tyler Blackwood," I said. "Must be some mistake." Sandra's laugh was like ice cracking. "Please don't insult my intelligence. We have photographs, witnesses, and a paper trail. The boy has been seen entering this building regularly. His teacher at Westport High confirmed a new student matching his description enrolled 3 weeks ago with your address." She stepped closer, and I smelled her perfume. Something expensive and suffocating. "I know exactly what you are," she whispered. "A desperate woman who saw an opportunity. How much were you planning to demand for his return? 50,000? 100? Or were you hoping to seduce Preston with this little Good Samaritan act?" The accusation was so shocking I actually laughed, which only made her angrier. "I should have known," she continued, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "First you abuse your ex-husband, and now you're exploiting children. What kind of woman takes in a teenage boy she's not related to? We all know what this is really about." The implications in her voice made me feel dirty, sick. This woman was painting me as a predator in front of my neighbors, and I could see doubt creeping into their faces. Tyler chose that moment to come home from school, freezing when he saw Sandra. The fear on his face was primal, animal. Sandra's smile widened. "Hello, Tyler. Time to stop this nonsense and come home." But Tyler surprised us all. Instead of cowering, he straightened his shoulders and walked directly to me, taking my hand. "This is my home," he said clearly. "And I have proof of what you did to me." He pulled out his phone and played a recording that made everyone freeze. Sandra's voice, threatening to lock him in the basement until he learned his place. Another of her saying his mother deserved what happened to her. Sandra's face went white, then purple with rage. She lunged for the phone, but Tyler stepped back. "I have copies," he said. "Uploaded to cloud storage, sent to trusted friends. If anything happens to Ainsley or me, they go public." One of the lawyers whispered urgently in Sandra's ear. She composed herself with visible effort. "This isn't over," she promised. "I'll destroy you like I destroyed his worthless mother. You'll lose everything, and Tyler will end up exactly where he belongs. Somewhere he can't embarrass the family anymore." After she left, I was fired via text message. Marina was apologetic but firm. She couldn't afford the controversy. My landlord slipped an eviction notice under my door an hour later. When I checked the name on the building's new ownership documents, my heart sank. Derek had bought it through one of his shell companies. He and Sandra had clearly joined forces, 2 predators circling their prey. The neighbors who'd smiled at me that morning now avoided eye contact. In one afternoon, I'd become a pariah again. Tyler was devastated. "I've ruined your life," he said over and over. "You should just let me go. I'll survive on the streets. I did before." I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. "You saved my life," I said fiercely. "Before you came, I was just existing." going through the motions. You gave me a reason to fight, someone to protect. We're family now, and family doesn't give up on each other." But even as I said it, I wondered how we'd survive what was coming. That night, my parents made their final play. They showed up with Derek, apparently willing to testify about my unstable behavior and inappropriate relationships throughout my life. Grace had even created a fictional history of mental illness, complete with forged therapy notes. "We just want what's best for you," she said, not meeting my eyes. Derek stood behind her, smirking. He'd bought them completely, probably with promises of continued financial support. Looking at these people who'd raised me, who I'd loved unconditionally, I felt nothing but pity. They'd sold their souls for money and were too lost to even realize what they'd become. Desperation drove me to make a call I'd been avoiding. Meredith Chen was an investigative journalist who'd made her career exposing corruption among the wealthy elite. She'd eaten at the diner several times, always alone, always watching everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. I'd served her coffee and pie, making small talk about the weather while she typed furiously on her laptop. Now I needed her skills, and I prayed she'd remember the waitress who'd always made sure her coffee was perfect. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the interest in her voice when I mentioned the Blackwood name.
Preston Blackwood's secret sont?
Living with a waitress? This is either the story of the year, or you're having a psychotic break. I convinced her to meet us at a truck stop diner 2 towns over, somewhere Sandra's investigators wouldn't think to look. Tyler brought his evidence, hands shaking as he handed over years of documentation he'd secretly compiled. Meredith's expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed everything. "This is bigger than just custody," she said finally. "If even half of this is true, we're talking about potential murder, child abuse, and conspiracy." She turned to Tyler with surprising gentleness. "I need you to tell me about your mother's death. Every detail." Tyler's story came out in fits and starts. Claire had called him the night she died, scared and talking about finally having proof of something. She'd been investigating discrepancies in Preston's company, money being funneled to Sandra's family businesses. "She said she was going to make Preston choose," Tyler whispered. "Either leave Sandra or she'd expose everything." The pieces clicked together horribly. Claire hadn't just been Preston's mistress, she'd been his secretary with access to financial records. Her death came days before a major audit that would have exposed the embezzlement. Tyler pulled out a flash drive he'd hidden for years. "Mom mailed this to me the day she died. Told me to keep it safe, that it was insurance." Meredith plugged it into her laptop, and her eyes widened. Financial records, emails between Sandra and her father planning to drain money from Blackwood Industries, and most damning, a recorded conversation where Sandra discussed removing the Claire problem permanently. "We need somewhere safe to go through all this," Meredith said, already packing up. "I have a cabin upstate. Off the grid, no connection to me publicly. But we need to move now." As we left, I noticed a black SUV that had been idling in the parking lot suddenly start its engine. The drive to Meredith's cabin was tense, taking back roads and doubling back multiple times. But Derek had resources we'd underestimated. He'd been tracking my phone, probably since the divorce, and let Sandra's team write to us. The confrontation at the cabin was violent and chaotic. Derek arrived first, drunk on power and whatever else he'd been taking. He grabbed Tyler, shouting about the finder's fee Sandra had promised him. $50,000 just for delivering the brat, he slurred. More than enough to make up for what I lost in the divorce. Tyler fought back with surprising ferocity, months of fear converting to rage. In the struggle, Derek's mask finally slipped completely. "You stupid bitch," he screamed at me while trying to drag Tyler to his car. "You could have had everything. I gave you a perfect life, and you threw it away over some stupid affair. You think I was the only one cheating? Your precious daddy's been skimming from the hardware store for years to pay for his gambling. Your mother's been popping pills since you were in high school. I kept their secrets, paid their debts, and all you had to do was play the grateful wife. But no, you had to grow a conscience." The words tumbled out in his rage, years of carefully hidden truths. He'd been embezzling from his company long before we met, using our marriage as cover. The prenup wasn't just unfair, it was designed to leave me destitute if I ever discovered his crimes. He'd counted on my parents' greed to keep me in line, paying them monthly to ensure their loyalty. They practically sold you to me, he laughed. 30 pieces of silver, adjusted for inflation. That's when the police arrived. Meredith had called them the moment Derek appeared, and they'd heard everything. As they arrested Derek for attempted kidnapping and assault, he made one final mistake. "You think this matters?" he screamed. "Sandra owns half the police force. Preston owns the other half. You're all going to disappear just like that whore Claire." The officers exchanged glances. Confession to conspiracy and murder wasn't what they'd expected from a simple kidnapping call. Sandra arrived as Derek was being driven away, her composure finally cracking when she saw the police. She tried to maintain control, demanding Tyler be released to her custody, but Meredith was already streaming live on her platform. Thousands of viewers watched as Sandra threatened everyone present, promised to destroy careers and lives, and finally made the fatal error of offering the lead detective a briefcase full of cash. "That's attempted bribery of a law enforcement officer," he said calmly. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." Preston Blackwood himself arrived as his wife was being handcuffed. For the first time in 6 years, Tyler faced his father outside of supervised visits. Preston looked older than his publicity photos, worn down by the weight of his secrets. He took in the scene, his wife in custody, his son standing with a waitress he'd never met, reporters already gathering as Meredith's story went viral. The empire he'd built on lies was crumbling in real time. "Tyler," he said, voice breaking. "Son, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Tyler stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might forgive everything. Instead, he held up his mother's flash drive. "You let her die," he said quietly. "You knew what Sandra was capable of, and you let her near my mother. You chose money and reputation over truth. Over me." Preston's face crumbled. He aged 10 years in 10 seconds, the weight of his choices finally crushing him. "I know," he whispered. "I've known all along, and I was too much of a coward to stop it." The media storm that followed was everything Sandra had feared. Meredith's story dominated headlines for weeks. Billionaire's secret son exposes murder plot. Socialite Sandra Blackwood arrested for conspiracy. Preston Blackwood's empire built on blood. The investigation uncovered years of financial crimes, Sandra's family's involvement in money laundering, and enough evidence to reopen Claire's death as a homicide. Tyler's recordings and documents were crucial evidence. The boy who'd eaten from dumpsters became the key witness in one of the biggest scandals of the decade. The custody hearing was set for 6 weeks after Sandra's arrest. Tyler was placed in my temporary custody, while the courts sorted through the mess of who had legal rights to him. Preston, out on bail and facing his own charges for financial crimes, didn't contest it. He seemed broken, moving through life like a ghost. Sandra, denied bail as a flight risk, raged from her cell, firing lawyer after lawyer who couldn't perform miracles. The media circus was intense, but Meredith helped us navigate it, ensuring Tyler's privacy while keeping public opinion on our side. I testified first, describing finding Tyler homeless and hungry, the condition he was in, and the fear in his eyes when Sandra appeared. I spoke about the boy who helped with chores and left me encouraging notes, who did homework at the diner and discussed Shakespeare while making dinner. The prosecutor asked why I'd taken in a stranger when I had nothing myself. "Because someone should have," I said simply. "Because being poor doesn't mean you can't help someone poorer. Because family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's just two broken people choosing to heal together." Tyler's testimony was powerful and heartbreaking. He detailed years of abuse, not just from Sandra but from a system designed to hide wealthy families' crimes. He showed photos of the basement room where he'd been locked for days at a time. He played recordings of Sandra describing how she'd handle him once he turned 18, mentions of institutions where troublesome heirs could disappear. He spoke about his mother with love and grief, describing a woman who'd tried to protect him even as she fought her own battles. Character witnesses came forward unexpectedly. Marina testified despite the risk to her business, describing how I'd worked myself to exhaustion, but always made sure Tyler ate first. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, whom I'd helped with groceries, told the court about seeing us study together at the kitchen table visible from her window. Even some of Derek's former employees testified, revealing they'd known about his abuse but been threatened into silence. Each testimony painted a picture of chosen family versus blood relatives who'd failed their most basic duties. Preston took the stand on the final day, and his testimony shocked everyone. He confessed to knowing about Sandra's treatment of Tyler, about suspecting her involvement in Claire's death, about choosing his fortune over his son's safety. "I'm not asking for custody," he said, looking directly at Tyler. "I'm asking for the chance to earn forgiveness someday. Tyler deserves better than what I gave him. He found it with Ms. Henderson." His lawyers looked murderous, but Preston continued. "I failed as a father. The best thing I can do now is ensure he stays with someone who succeeded where I failed." The judge's decision was swift and decisive. Tyler would remain in my custody until he turned 18, with conditions for Preston's involvement. Supervised visits if Tyler chose them, mandatory family therapy, and financial support that would go directly to Tyler's needs, not through me. "This court has seen many custody battles," the judge said, "but rarely one where the answer was so clear. Love isn't about DNA or bank accounts. It's about showing up when it matters." Ms. Henderson showed up. As we left the courthouse, my parents were waiting on the steps. They looked older, smaller, diminished by their choices. Grace stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Ainsley, please. We made a mistake. We're your parents. We love you." I looked at them, really looked at them for the first time in months. They weren't evil, just weak. They'd chosen the easy path, the comfortable lie, the security of money over the uncertainty of truth. But their choices had consequences. "You taught me everything I needed to know about family," I said calmly. "You taught me that blood doesn't matter if there's no loyalty, that love can be bought and sold, that a child's pain is worth less than a comfortable retirement. I'm grateful for those lessons because they taught me exactly what kind of person I never want to be." Robert finally spoke, his voice cracking. "We just wanted what was best for you." Tyler stepped beside me, taking my hand. "No," he said firmly. "You wanted what was easiest for you. There's a difference." We walked away together, leaving them on those courthouse steps. The news reported later that Derek was sentenced to 15 years for embezzlement, fraud, and attempted kidnapping. His company sued him for millions in stolen funds. My parents' house went into foreclosure when Derek's payments stopped, and their debts caught up with them. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, just a distant sadness for the family we might have been if they'd chosen differently. Sandra got 25 to life for conspiracy to commit murder, among other charges. Claire's case was reopened, and new evidence suggested she'd been pushed. Sandra's family empire crumbled as investigations revealed decades of criminal activity. She would spend her remaining years in a cell, her designer suits replaced with orange jumpsuits. Justice came late for Claire, but it came. Preston began the long journey of redemption. He liquidated most of his assets to pay restitution, stepped down from his company, and committed to intensive therapy. His first letter to Tyler was short. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying to become the father you deserved all along." Tyler didn't respond for months, but he kept the letter. Healing, we both learned, couldn't be rushed. 6 months after the trial, our lives had found a new rhythm. We'd moved to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood, paid for by the Victims' Compensation Fund established for those hurt by the Blackwood crimes. Tyler thrived at his new school, free from the fear of being dragged back to Sandra's mansion. He joined the debate team, made friends who knew nothing about his father's billions, and slowly learned to smile without checking over his shoulder first. I enrolled in community college, working toward a social work degree with Tyler's encouragement. "You saved me," he'd say. "Maybe you can save others too." Our Tuesday dinners became a tradition. We'd cook together, Tyler teaching me recipes he'd learned from watching cooking shows during his basement imprisonment. He had a gift for flavors, turning cheap ingredients into feasts. "Food was love in our house," he explained once, meaning the home he'd shared with his mother. Even when we had nothing else, we had Sunday dinners. I understood. Food was how we showed care when words weren't enough. Every meal was a celebration of survival, of choosing each other when the world tried to tear us apart. Preston joined us for dinner after 3 months of family therapy. The first meeting was awkward, full of false starts and long silences. But slowly, tentatively, father and son began building something new. Not the relationship they should have had, but the one they could manage now. Preston listened more than he spoke, learning about the son he'd never bothered to know. Tyler showed him school projects, shared his dreams of becoming a lawyer to help other forgotten children. Preston's pride was genuine but restrained, understanding he'd lost the right to take credit for the man Tyler was becoming. Marina hired me back with a raise and an apology. The diner had become something of a tourist attraction after the story broke, people coming to see where the billionaire's son had found refuge. She grumbled about the attention but appreciated the business. Tyler still did homework in the corner booth, now joined by study groups who treated him like any other teenager. The normalcy was a gift neither of us took for granted. I started a support group for displaced youth at the community center, sharing our story to help others. Teenagers who'd been kicked out for being gay, for refusing arranged marriages, for not meeting their parents' expectations. Tyler often spoke at meetings, his privilege checking any assumptions that family dysfunction only happened to the poor. Money can't buy love, he'd say. It just hides the absence better. Together, we created a network of chosen families, proof that love didn't require shared DNA. Tyler's 17th birthday was the first he'd celebrated freely. No locked doors, no Sandra's cruel reminders that he was unwanted. We invited his friends, Marina, Mrs. Chun, even Meredith, who'd become an honorary aunt. Preston came with a simple gift, a photo album of Claire he'd hidden from Sandra for years. Tyler cried over pictures of his mother, seeing her young and happy before secrets poisoned everything. It was the first time he'd hugged his father since he was 10. Healing happened in moments like that, small and precious and hard-won. College acceptance letters arrived in spring. Tyler had his pick of schools, his grades and story making him a compelling candidate. He chose a state school with a strong pre-law program, close enough to visit but far enough to build his own life. "I want to earn it," he said when Preston offered to pay full tuition. They compromised, Preston covering books and housing while Tyler worked for spending money. It was progress, measured in small victories and mutual respect. Derek wrote from prison, a rambling letter full of accusations and threats. I burned it unread in the sink while Tyler made popcorn for movie night. My parents sent cards for holidays, stilted messages about missing me and hoping for reconciliation. I kept them in a drawer, not ready to forgive, but unable to throw away the last pieces of the people who'd raised me. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't required for moving forward. Sometimes the best gift you could give someone was distance. Meredith won a Pulitzer for her expose on the Blackwood scandal. She donated part of the prize money to our youth shelter, ensuring other Tylers would have somewhere safe to go. The investigation she'd started revealed similar patterns in other wealthy families. Hidden children discarded for convenience, paid to stay quiet or disappeared entirely. Tyler testified before Congress about reforming custody laws, his voice steady as he spoke truth to power. The boy who'd eaten from dumpsters was changing laws to protect others like him. My graduation day arrived with May flowers and Tyler's proud cheering from the audience. I'd earned my associate degree in social work while working full-time, studying at the same kitchen table where Tyler did calculus. As I walked across that stage, I thought about the woman standing in the rain outside her parents' house, broken and alone and certain life was over. She couldn't have imagined this moment, this life, this family built from ashes and determination. Preston sat beside Tyler, their relationship still complicated but growing stronger. He'd started a foundation for displaced youth, putting his remaining fortune toward preventing other fathers' failures. My parents weren't there, their absence a familiar ache that had dulled to acceptance. But Marina was there, and Mrs. Chun, and dozens of young people from our support group. Family, I'd learned, was who showed up when showing up mattered. That night, Tyler gave a speech at my graduation dinner that left everyone in tears. He spoke about finding me in his darkest moment, how I'd given him hope when he'd forgotten what hope felt like. Ainsley taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid, he said. It's about protecting someone else even when you're terrified. It's about choosing love when the world gives you every reason to choose hate. The boy who said, "My dad is a billionaire," thought money determined worth. But she taught me wealth isn't money. Real wealth is the courage to love when you've lost everything. It's building family from scratch. It's getting up every day and choosing to believe people are worth saving. We'd come so far from that cold February night by the dumpster. Two broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward light together. Tyler would leave for college in the fall, ready to fight for other forgotten children. I'd continue my education, working with youth who needed someone to believe in them. Preston would keep earning redemption one day at a time. And somewhere, Claire would rest easier knowing her son was loved and safe, and fighting to make the world better. The story that began with parents slamming a door in my face had become something beautiful. Not despite the pain, but because of what we'd built from it. Tyler was right. True wealth wasn't in bank accounts or family names. It was in the courage to love after loss, to trust after betrayal, to build family from the ashes of abandonment. We'd lost everything society said mattered, and found the only things that actually did. As Tyler headed to bed that night, he paused at my door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for choosing me when you had nothing to give, for showing me what family really means." I hugged him tight, this remarkable young man who'd saved me while I was saving him. "Thank you," I whispered back, "for reminding me that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose. And that's the truth I want to leave with you today. When the world breaks you, when family fails you, when you're standing in the rain with nowhere to go, remember this. Somewhere, someone else is breaking too. And sometimes two broken people choosing each other is how wholeness begins." The homeless boy who claimed his dad was a billionaire taught me that real wealth can't be measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives we touch, the love we choose, and the families we build when blood relatives prove that DNA doesn't guarantee loyalty. What about you? Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Have you chosen love when it would have been easier to choose bitterness? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember they're not alone. Subscribe for more stories of hope rising from heartbreak, of families built from courage rather than blood. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, you are worthy of love, capable of healing, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to save you while you're saving them. Until next time, choose kindness, choose courage, and most importantly, choose each other.